Welcome back to another episode of the DNA of Things, where we explore the fascinating intersection of human potential, personal journeys, and scientific advancements. I'm your host, Dr. Jeremy Koenig. Now, today I am thrilled to bring you a special guest. From Red Bull to rockets, we've got Brandon Larson, CEO and founder of Fantastic Dads. So Brandon's incredible background spans from cutting-edge research at Boeing and Red Bull to helping astronauts safely launch and return with NASA. And if you can imagine, he's taken things to the next level, intergenerationally speaking, by creating the platform to revolutionize fatherhood. That is the Fantastic Dads playbook. Now, in this episode, we dive into Brandon's journey from elite sports science to parenthood and uncovering how his experiences have shaped Fantastic Dads. I'll tell you, as a new dad, this was exactly the resource I was looking for. There were a lot of books for parents in general, a lot of stuff for expecting moms, but not a lot of stuff for us dads to sink our teeth into and be a true support to the birthing process, to the critical years of development, most notably the first months, the first year of development. But as we'll explore human development more broadly with Brandon today, we will talk, more deeply about the importance of the first 3 years of human development. And we're going to bring to light some practical strategies for intentional parenting. So stay tuned. This is going to be a great conversation that promises to enrich your understanding of family and your own personal growth. So let's dive in. Here we are on the DNA of Things. It's my pleasure to, let's say, introduce Brandon Larson. We'll call him the CEO and founder of Fantastic Dads. But as you'll see, Brandon has an incredible history that brought him to Fantastic Dads. But first, let me say welcome, Brandon. It's great to have you on the show.
Dude, Jeremy, thank you so much, man. I'm so excited.
Yeah, this has been a long time coming because, it's interesting. I actually got introduced to you through, I think it was Taylor Johnson, right?
Yep, TJ.
Yeah, so it's like the realm of human performance, let's say. But we actually found out that we used to know each other like some 10 years ago in the realm of Red Bull and performance DNA.
Yep. I was like, wait, didn't we shake hands? I think we sat in a meeting for a whole day. Athletic back in the day.
We did. And I think
through their DNA.
That's right. And I think I was there at the X Factor that you guys were putting on for like extreme athletes, like the breath holds and the snakes and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. Love it. But the reason that we were reconnected was actually at the time I was talking to Taylor about my impending fatherhood and how I just absolutely have no idea what I'm getting into, how I'm going to be helpful to my partner, to my wife Kristen, how I'm going to be a good dad. And Taylor was like, dude, you need to talk to Brandon Larson. I was like, oh, that name sounds familiar. And then, we got to the familiarity, but, I'm happy to say actually Wednesday is an amazing day, this Wednesday in particular. And as I, look down at the screen, gosh, I'm not superstitious at all, but it's also 11/11. I think that's like the when you make a wish kind of thing. But Wednesdays are actually the day that, fast forward, I think I'm like, 30 weeks in or eight months in on having a newborn. And I think I'm at week 28 or 29 of Fantastic Dads. And it's become a weekly ritual that my wife have kind of built around at least this early stages of developing our family. So, Wednesday night's family date night, and we listen to Fantastic Dads. And essentially, obviously I want to let you dive into explaining what this is, but I'll just quickly say that it's been an incredible tool for me, evidence-based, science-based facts that are really designed to help dads be real contributors to the family, especially in the earlier stages where, frankly, there's just not a lot of resources. But before we dive into Fantastic Dads, I think I was captivated by the title of another podcast that you were on that we talked about, which was, what was it, from Red Bull to rockets. So, and now here we are
kind of on the cusp of, fantastic dads really starting to take off. So it's like Red Bull to rockets to, to I don't even know what is going to get us out of this world in terms of, investing in the next generation. And I want to actually just, before I let you give me your backstory, I wanted to, just speak to our listeners who might be thinking, what does this have to do with the DNA of things? Like, isn't this a podcast about DNA? And, firstly, it's entitled in such a way that, you can use it metaphorically, if you will. But when I think about family now, it's like, here it is, you look at your child and that's literally your DNA in the form of an inheritance that you passed on and the legacy to the future. So anyway, with that being said, Brandon, tell us how you came to be the founder, CEO of Fantastic Dads.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, man, so much that you just cracked open. We could spend 6 days talking about stuff. I know we
Right.
probably both have the endurance for it. So if you want to do
For
the
sure.
extended series, let's do it. Man, yeah. I mean, I think you got to start with a little bit of background first. My background is I grew up in Louisiana. I grew up in a small town. Well, it was small then. After Hurricane Katrina, it became a bigger city in Louisiana. But probably since I was a kid, I always knew I liked to just build stuff. I was just always really curious, and I liked to look at the world and try to understand how it worked and why it worked. I like to observe things. I like to observe people. I was just curious about everything. And I lived in this town, and I went to a small liberal arts school there because I was honestly, I was really scared to even leave to get out of the town and the comfort of, the safe space around our neighborhood and places like that. So I studied physics. I got a degree in physics, even though I wanted to be a mechanical engineer. And I realized, well, got to start back over. So I went to school for mechanical engineering. Really enjoyed that a lot. Was encouraged by my professors there to stay and get an advanced degree. So I did an advanced degree in systems engineering, and that's like, how you integrate lots of big complex things into something that's even more complex but works well. At least that's the goal. But from there, I ended up in research and development for a bunch of years at the Boeing company, doing things for space-based advanced technologies. So we would try to figure out how to make solar panels that could package up into a small container and then deploy and still have as much power generation capability as giant, large, rigid solar panels. And there were things that needed this: high power satellites. The International Space Station needed updates to its solar arrays. So we did a lot of work in those areas, but that kind of led me into this whole path of being in research and development with Phantom Works at the Boeing company. And then I met this guy named Dr. Andy Walsh. He was an Australian sports scientist. And it was this totally random happenstance of a situation. But a friend of mine sent a Facebook video to me and just said, hey, this company, Red Bull, they're looking for people that have big ideas, and you can win $5,000 if your idea is the best. So I said, man, I have a lot of big ideas. I've got 24 hours. I've got some friends. I've got some adult beverages and some pizza. So let's make a Rube Goldberg machine in the garage, have it open a can of Red Bull, and I can do my pitch live while the Rube Goldberg machine is doing its thing. And for anybody that's not familiar with the Rube Goldberg machine, you've seen him before, you know what I'm talking about. The light switch goes off and it pops a balloon, and that causes a bunch of dominoes to go over, and then it kicks off the toaster and you have toast, but in a totally convoluted way. So the thing I pitched to Red Bull was a global scale, human interactive Rube Goldberg machine that would chase New Year's around the world and unite the entire planet in a 24-hour celebration of humanity and art and technology and science and math and culture, athleticism, sport, you name it. Just bring the whole planet together for 24 hours around this huge human interactive machine. Red Bull liked it. Turned out their CEO in North America was also a mechanical engineer, which is pretty cool. And that led me to Andy Walsh. At that time, I told Andy, I said, man, look, I love problem solving. That's my favorite thing in the whole world. Just give me a big problem and I'll detangle it like you detangle, at least me, I detangle my wife's necklaces every once in a while. And in the end, they said, hey, the big problems aren't in space. The big problems aren't in research and development. Big problems are with people trying to accomplish these things. And I realized that Andy was absolutely right. So that was the thing that lured me over to the Red Bull team. We had a small team for a handful of years in the background at Red Bull, working to help those athletes chase and achieve their dreams using all sorts of cutting edge science, technology, and everything else you can think of. And that's how, we originally met, unbeknownst to us at the time. But yeah, honestly, from there, it just turns into, I just enjoy problem solving. And when I found that I was going to have a kid, it was 2016. My wife brought in the drippy pee stick, and she just said, "Hey, you're going to be a dad. I'm going to be a mom." And honestly, in that moment, I was overjoyed, but I realized that I'd never held a baby. I'd never thought about having a baby. My wife and I had always said that if it happened, and we would do the best at it. If it didn't happen, it wouldn't be something that we dwelled on. And here it was. So I did what I think most people do, and you go and you try to read a couple books. You don't know what to start with, but you go read a couple books. And I didn't find the books to be too fulfilling. Honestly, they felt like the books at the time for dads were kind of the fart jokes of the parenting world. It was not a good look. I found that the internet was way too full of opinions. I was always shocked at how emotionally involved people get at other people's lives, when it seems like, raising kids is pretty all encompassing just in your own world. And I didn't really know what to do. So one day when I was sitting at work, I had an email that was going out to a group of scientists that we were asking questions about a specific athlete that we were looking to develop a better performance plan for. And in that, I wrote a PS, and I just said, "Hey, I'm going to be a dad in like 6 months. Can anybody give me some pointers on how I don't totally mess it up? Thanks, Brandon." And the responses I got back from that were what kicked this whole thing off. Yeah. I could tell you that story next.
Wow.
I have been talking a long time. You might have to cut that little part out.
No, man, this is great context. I mean, I'm listening to you, and I'm just kind of reflecting, on my own journey, and how it is that I've benefited so much from, like, one of the things that we've kind of kicked back and forth is, around your mission and the passion towards, creating something like Fantastic Dads, insofar as, hey, it's, really a question of your love for the simplicity and complexity that is, in as much as you've described this background in terms of, the intricacies of systems, physical systems. I mean, we've talked about systems biology previously before. We've had really far out conversations on, network analysis and ecosystems. And, for me, it's like, yeah, I know all those things are going on in the background, but how do I even hold a baby? And what's that even going to be like? And, we I think, started having these conversations, just as I was, probably weeks before. I actually, that's not true. I reached out to you a week after I had we had Brooke, and I was, already feeling like I'm too late. And I didn't get an email reply like right away. Remember, that was it. I was like, "Hey man, I emailed, I signed up for this thing. I already now feel like I'm behind." And he's like, "Oh man," he said, I know I got this. It was going to my other email. You're set up. You're going to get these emails every week. Don't worry if you're a week behind, because, it's not, really an exact science in terms of down to the day what to expect in the first few weeks, et cetera." But, I remember having a conversation with you around issues with weight gain, right? Like, that was something we were, really, really, scared of as new parents, because we would go in, it was like, we got to the point where we were going weekly because, we wanted to see the weight gain. Every time we went in, it's like, oh, Brooke moved from the 50th percentile down to the 20th, down to the 12th, down to the first percentile. And now we're meeting with the pediatrician, and we're like, oh my gosh, like, what's going on? Me with the DNA background, I'm like, there's, a rare genetic disease in there. So we've got her sequenced, and, they're were a number of things that, were the root cause. I mean, we were, I think, dealing with a lot of stress where in my, sister-in-law lost her husband. So that was really, I think, affecting my wife's mental health, just first time breastfeeding and, getting the latch and, one breast not performing as well as the other. So all these things, biologically, as we know, there's a ton of variation there. But just even having like other dads to talk to during that process was really cool because it wasn't, that you were providing like a prescription or anything. Like I had the doctors for that, but it was like, hey, I could, talk to other dads and get moral support outside of this. And we were just kind of doing this informally, but then, he would also set up, I think there was like an impromptu Zoom that we were just kind of seeing if we could build community around getting dads together. But anyway, fast forward now. And as I mentioned, at the top of the call, we're actually at week 35 of 52. We're on baby moves number 9, and I'm sure you've probably been upgrading these. But this episode, we're moving into like the fine motor skills, and I'm excited to listen to this today. As I mentioned, today's like family night, date night, because actually we're starting to see these things happen with Brooke's development in her feeding and actually like just watching her manipulate with precision the kind of pincer movement, which is exciting to see aligned with some of the things that you outline in the progression. And so maybe that's something that I'd love to personally know, and I'm sure people would love to know also, is how did you come up with the idea behind the progression? So how did you come up with the curriculum? Where did you go to get your information? Because you're a physicist. I mean, people I think who are were probably expert in childhood rearing are like, hey, what's a physicist doing in developing this kind of a curriculum? So I'd be really interested to hear how you applied your scientific mind to this incredibly useful resource.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to put it. Okay, so again, the way it started was I'm working at Red Bull. We're a team that helps elite athletes maintain their eliteness or even find that next level of goatdom, right? And I'm sitting there, I write an email out to everybody. Hey, P.S., how do I not totally mess this up? I honestly think, and I attribute all of this to this one email that I got back. It was by this guy named Crazy Dave. At least that's what we called him. He has 4 PhDs. 2 of those PhDs are MDs, or medical doctor PhDs. I don't know how he's done it. He works in government intelligence, and he wrote me back. And at the time, I had a beard. He said, "Hey, Brandon, when you get to the 2-month mark, through the 8-month mark, shave your beard off." And that's all the email wrote. That's all that was there. And I was like, Dave, you left me on a cliffhanger. So of course, write him back. 2 weeks later, I get a message back from him. He goes, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I should have included a little more context." He said, "This is the part in the brain development, in the neurobiology, where the child is trying to do a lot of pattern recognition, but then the micro expressions within the mouth and the eyes and all in the face is what you'll notice." And you've probably seen this with your child, and you'll see it more, is they look to your mouth and to your eyes to try and understand information. There's a lot of circuits that we have for those things that's what they do. And so this kicked off this big question for me of, wait, if there's this sensitive period in the biology that he's telling me about, are there other sensitive periods? So remember, I'd gone and tried to read maybe a parenting book here and there, or a book on neuroscience, or a book on any of this. And the problem is that those resources, while some of them are really fantastic, a lot of them are, or I'd say all of them, are very limited in what they look at and what they give to the reader, right? So you have an expert in one area, and they go really deep in that one area, and they write a book in that one area, and they give that book to the world as their gift. But when you look at athlete development programs, we have to look at everything from a holistic model, from the full soup to nuts, from today is 4 years before you're standing at the top of, at the starting line at that race in the Olympics. How do we create a plan for you to periodize and build up and recover so that you peak 4 years from now in that 2-week window. So this is just an entirely different approach. And when I realized that, essentially with Dave's email of telling me that I should maybe consider a specific type of environment for my child's brain in a period of time, that essentially turned me into a truffle pig, sniffing around in the mud, trying to find as many bits and pieces of information on sensitive periods in human beings and human development across the lifespan. At that point, I made a very, very impactful connection for myself, is that there is no child development and there is no parenting. There is human development, and that's it, because it's human development across the lifespan. We might call it the child part, but the child part affects the later years. So the big wrapper of understanding is human development. So for me, I wanted to build myself a human development plan for me, my family, and my child, so that I could, just like the athletes, you're here and you want to be here in 4 years. How can I be here and be somewhere in this area in about 4 years or 5 years or 6 years or whatever? And so I hit the books hard. I called experts. I sent that original email to 50 people, and Dave was the one that really stood out. But there were 49 more responses that were just as impactful as what Dave said. And none of these were things I'd ever seen in a parenting book, a blog. And some of them were very hard to even find through Googling. And so at that point, I wrote myself a plan. And I later had a friend, a guy named Steve Guerra. He was a coach for the Chargers or the Browns at the time. And he said, "Hey, man, I'm about to have a kid." He was 3 months behind me. "I don't know. This is nothing sets right. The resources all suck." And I said, "Hey, man, I'm like, this is what I'm doing. I'm sports sciencing it, kind of." He goes, "Oh, yeah. Why didn't I think of that?" Because he's in the same field. So we started kind of sports sciencing it together and being buddies on the whole thing. Never really had any intention on doing much with it at that point. We'd shared this plan with some other friends, and then they kind of shared it with other friends. And at one point, people said, "Brandon, would you write a book on this? This is good stuff." I said, "Well, personally," and this is where humor is a funny way of being serious, is starting as a physicist and then going into mechanical engineering, you learn the building blocks of how things work, and you learn how to look at problems by letting the stones be turned over and getting to a point where you understand the problem really fully. And so in some areas, it's called first principles thinking, or finding the kernels of truth, or finding the foundations or the root cause. There's a lot of language that can be used to describe getting to the bottom of something and then building back up. And so in this is where I say, with some jest, is that, no, I don't want to write a book, because books are where ideas go to die. And I don't mean that on the great works and the big books, but I mean, if you want to change somebody's behavior, or if you want somebody to learn something new, which means stimuli, behavior, same stimuli, different behavior, you've now changed behavior and somebody has learned something. And so if you want people to learn something, a book is not necessarily the greatest way to do that, because it's one way, it's too much information all at once. You got to sit down for 6 hours, 4 to 6 hours, and read it. You kind of need to make a plan. You have to hold yourself accountable. You got to set up your own discipline system. You got to execute it and check back in with yourself. It's too much. But that's how we do it with athletes, with a heavy touch, right? You give them one little thing to work on. And then once they've gotten that, one more little thing, and you do all those little things over time, and all of a sudden you're the best in the world. There's other things that go into it, but that's the general pattern. So that's all I did, is I said, look, I can write a book. Let's just say it's 52 chapters, but I only want to go through one chapter a week. And I don't think anybody should ever read more than one chapter a week. So that's where the idea came to test this out in about late 2019, I believe, of just taking a book on the first year foundations, or how people can create strong foundations for fatherhood in the first year, and I put that on a website at fantasticdads.com as a newsletter. And essentially you just enter your address and you get one email a week, which is one chapter a week. And I found, especially with athletes, is that the training methods are, especially when you have one-way communication with somebody, where you're a teacher or an instructor, especially in a digital environment, and you're writing, people are reading it later. It's very one way, and in that case, it's very hard to like, I'm not a mind reader, right? I don't have that ability. So I'm making an educated guess of people wanting to either have a little time or a lot of time, wanting to read the wave tops or go deep into the ocean. And so I built the content in such a manner that you can get enough to take action very quickly, or you can go and master it if you really like, by going down the rabbit hole and checking out the full breadth and depth of every single weekly email plus various resources. Yeah, that was in 2019, but that is the concept of how it's evolved until then. And we're currently in a place of giving it the next round of polish. We could talk about that later. But that's that's essentially how it got started, is that it's not about parenting and it's not about child development. It's about human development across the lifespan. And I've got it from conception till about 7 years old right now. And I'm going to go conception to 18, and then we'll see where it goes from there. But this is just my nerd hobby.
Right.
Hardcore.
Right. Well, it is interesting insofar as that distinction of, parenting versus human development. Because, like I think about some of our conversations, and just, for the benefit of the listeners, we've had the, I guess, privilege of interaction now for, at least, what is it?
At least 38 months.
At least 35, 30. Well, yeah, let's call it at least 38 weeks. And so we've kind of batted back a few, really interesting ideas and had conversations, like, this notion about, child prodigies and, how to make them. And just to be clear, that's not what Fantastic Dads is necessarily about. Although, once you learn about critical windows, it's like, oh, well, maybe I introduce this idea of chess, or, just the piano, and just having them as part of the, the play toys. Like, so it's like developing this kind of intentionality with what you bring into the environment. And I used to think about this, a lot, as a coach as well, is, I think about it very, very oversimply stated here, where, let's think about a Venn diagram where you've got, call it the genetic predisposition. Then you've got the environment where that DNA just happens to be. And then you've got, call it the behavior, which, I'd say includes also, the culture that you're influenced by. But of course, there's overlap with the environment and, how that actually interacts with your genome. So it's this whole interactome, if you will. And so, I've been thinking about like childhood development in that way. And I'm not sure if this show is the right place to question this, but it's on my mind, so I'll just kind of kick it out there. But it's the whole idea of like agency and, and free will. And it's like, oh, well, I could have Brooke become a chess prodigy or a pianist or whatever. And it's not that is the thing that would necessarily, make me proud as a dad. It's more, hey, this is interesting. You mentioned the great books a few minutes back. It's like, yeah, my dad gave, Brooke the gift of all the great books in Western civilization. I would love, by the time Brooke's 18, for her to at least be familiar with all those 102 great ideas outlined there. And so it's really, I think what I've felt is more responsibility over that human development process. And that is, not necessarily outsourcing all of it to schools or community, et cetera, but, doing what I can do in the home, but, in a way that's, healthful and responsible and integrated into, kind of our family vision. But I guess I'd be interested to know your experience where, you've developed this resource. Is there a temptation to become overly prescriptive or controlling? I think I know the answer already, but I've kind of gotten that pushback from, existing parents. It's like, okay, well, you could want all those things, for your child, but, at the end of the day, you just have to let them play or be happy or, so what do you say to that kind of like, what will be type of attitude?
Yeah. Well, I'd say two things right off the bat come to mind. The first is that there is a fantastic researcher. Her name is Alison Gopnik. She wrote a book called The Carpenter and the Gardener and the Carpenter, or Carpenter and the Gardener. I don't know. But essentially what she said is that there are these two approaches. And again, first of all, just backing it up, I love systems, I love frameworks, I love models so that you can see like what are the big themes in any particular behavior set or approach, right? And in parenting, we talk about parenting styles, but how can we look at that through a different lens? And so Gopnik has a really useful lens, a useful framework that says, you can look at a child as a chair, carpenter, right? A carpenter's lens is a child is a chair, and you put it together and it's going to be a chair, and you get a chair as long as you do all the right things. But it's a chair and it's going to be a chair. Maybe you can paint it a different color. But in the garden, and you look at kids as a gardener, is that you have an environment. Changes in the environment are going to change the outcome of the plant. Changes in sunlight are going to change the outcome of the plant. The way you care for the plant will change. The pollinators in the area, all sorts of things. But you may still be growing a tomato, but that tomato is going to go all sorts of different kinds and shapes and ways and do all sorts of things that you cannot predict at all. But you can predict the chair you're going to build. And so that goes back to the idea as well of our kids, even in the nature nurture debates, which have, been settled for a little bit now that it's both, but are kids a blank slate or are kids already written? And it's somewhere in the middle as well. So backing that out, I think that these are useful frameworks to look at, to have those conversations through, but you do have to acknowledge that we don't really know. I think humans have been raising other humans and making good people for thousands and thousands and thousands of years without manuals and without books and without research. And we've only gotten to a point since about 2010, 11, 12, where functional magnetic resonance imaging fMRIs have been able to be used to look inside young developing minds and brains, to add more neuroscience to what we know. That's only been like 12, 13, 14 years. So we're still at the very early days of being able to say what's possible in human development and what we say, we can confidently say we know. I do think there are guiding posts, guiding pillars. So for me, there's three things that I will die on the hill. And those three things are that the first 3 years of a human's life are the most important and most critical and most impactful on that child's ultimate trajectory in their life. The first 3 years. And you could even call it the first 1,000 days is what others call it. Some models call it the first 4 years because you also take conception into account. But if we just say the first 3 years from birth until roughly 3, that is the biggest time of change and the settling of the brain and the most amount of those sensitive periods and everything, right? So those, I think, if you wanted to change a society, you go first principles. You have to help kids have a good first 3 years. There's a lot that would go into defining good, and there's going to be cultural definitions to good, but that's one of the first principles of it. The second principle, though, is that I think that a father or a parent or anybody really has to have routines in their lives and be given the space to have those routines in their lives where they can do a little bit of reflection and learning weekly or regularly on themselves and their child and their family unit. And so I think that that's just far more important to a family's early life is making a dedicated effort to a weekly routine of something, the same way you would study for a test, the same way you would train, your body or mind, the same way you dedicate time and effort to work. Any routine, I think that a big part in the transition into a family is having a weekly routine for reflecting and learning. And I think a lot of things would change if we could do that. That's also a little bit why Fantastic Dads is built the way it's built, because I want you to be able to have this 2 to 10 minute experience once a week, but regularly and consistently, so that it creates that routine and that ritual for the families that can make the time for that. But that said too, is that, just because, like, if, I'm sure we have lots of families and dads in your listening audience that are past that age of 3 with kids. Thing is that does not matter. The brain is plastic. We know this now. You can make change at any time in life. It gets a little harder as you get older to make change, but it's possible. There are ways to do it. And so starting today with rituals and routines for your family is better than starting tomorrow. And that's where I look at that. But I also, the last piece of this is I've been asked regularly, like, why dads, why not moms, why this, why that? I say, look, when you look at what you can control in life, you can control your own locus of control, my ability to believe in myself, my ability to navigate challenge, and my ability to feel that I'm effective in the things I do. Something we know from the literature is that parental self-efficacy, or a parent's belief in themselves to be able to at least navigate challenges, doesn't have to be successful, but have the confidence to lean in and go. That is almost the highest correlated thing with their involvement in their relationship with their kids, which helps with outcomes. So when I look at that, I say, against the other research, is that we also know that a human being in development needs at least one exceptional role model in their life. That does not have to be mom. It does not have to be dad. It could be crazy Uncle Ricky down the street, but they need one. And if you get one right, it can buffer against the ones that aren't great. And when we think about when I designed the program for myself, my locus of control, what can I control? I can control being the one person in my kid's life that I know is going to be awesome. Now, if he gets 2, my wife's pretty awesome. If he gets 3, our grandparents, we have pretty good grandparents. He has 4, we have some good friends. And then he's got more and more of these experiences that really help in those early years of life. But when people ask, why dads, why not everybody else? I say, look, I don't care who this program's for. I've written it because I'm a dad. I know dads. I know fatherhood. I know the fatherhood experience. And I think every dad should take it upon themselves to be that one, at least a one in their kid's life. And I don't think it's as complicated as like we've made it in society these days. It can be challenging. It can be hard. But that's kind of the call of why it's Fantastic Dads. Because that's what I can speak to, and that's what we can control. And if you have one, you're going in a better direction.
Well, it is, and I totally echo those sentiments. And, the one thing that I'll say from experience is, like, you have really certainly made it about human development, but then there's also, your own, as you mentioned, like personal reflection and regulation and stress management, because you actually do see, and it, yeah, sure, it makes sense, but it's really not, you don't see it as profound as it is until you actually see it in action. Like when I see Brooke, what is it we'd say is co-regulating off of predominantly Kristen's temperament. So, I'm usually like working in the back office, and then I'll like, and I'll come out like a crazy person, like, just like having my break. Hey, like dad's here, and just like loud and disrupting the environment. And what's really funny is that Brooke will actually look to my wife first, like, hey, is this a crazy person, or is this person okay? And then Grid's like, no, it's okay. It's just dad being dad. But yeah, just what I found personally very helpful is, knowing your background in human performance, knowing your, sound emphasis on first principles. It's like you're getting this guided information that you can can trust as a heuristic in terms of how to think about how humans develop. But then even just checking in with yourself, like there's, episodes on breathing for dads and, hey, like noticing and naming some of the stressors, like crying is going to be a thing for like the first 3 months. If you're lucky, that'll stop then. And it's like, what are your coping mechanisms, right? And like I think about, the slow breathing technique is one that you keep going back to. And it's like, oh yeah, well, that's so simple. It's like, yeah, it's simple, but it's not easy to remember in the moment, right? It's not easy to remember. Like when you hear, all the crying and the fussing, like to remember like, hey, like, what if there weren't those things? What if there is something critically wrong? And it's amazing how you can reframe and contextualize that to like hearing your baby cry is the best thing in the world. Like when I first heard it, that was like the most amazing sound I'd ever heard. So like using my breath to like bring me back to that moment. It's like, hey, this is a reminder that she's healthy and she's also asking for something. So how do I communicate, at the level that she's at and, potentially even extend her out into more sophisticated ways of using her words, et cetera, which are amazing. Like she's now starting to babble and say dad, and that's really cool. I wanted to touch on something that you brought up. Like we talked a little bit about fMRI. I want to get a sense of, from a futuristic point of view, and also given your background with Red Bull and NASA, like future tools that could help augment development, if that's the right word. But maybe before we dive into future, just interested to hear, generally like where is the program today? Like how many dads have used it? I know you've focused predominantly on the first year. You say you've got 7 in the queue, want to get to 18, which is super amazing. That makes me feel great because I know that, I can trust your research. What are other dads saying?
Let me address that. And before I do that, I want to touch on one thing you said, which was, in our past just conversation now, I mentioned a lot about kind of very high level frameworks of thinking about it. And we talked about that one good role model in a child's life being a big difference in outcomes. But you said it well, and I'm going to botch how you said it, but I'm adding on to it in that it really comes down to then how you define what that good role model is or does, or how they behave, or what that interaction looks like. And so that's where all the details come in. And those details are what bring us to kind of those weekly engagements. And because you're kind of in a period of time right now with language, I think that has been one of the more fascinating, sensitive periods, one that I've really enjoyed a lot. And, for instance, so there was in the early 2000s, there's a guy named Eric Jarvis. I think he was at Duke and now he's at Rockefeller University. And what he did was he was studying what is called vocal learning animals and mammals, or just animals. And there's not a lot of these, but what's pretty interesting is that there are songbirds, and these songbirds fit into the category of these vocal learning animals. And then there's one mammal or primate that is also falls in that category, which are humans. And vocal learning is essentially the ability to hear and look and take stimuli on sounds through our senses, and then turn those into motor pathways that allow us to replicate or attempt to replicate the sounds we've heard through speech and vocalizations. So he did these fascinating studies on all sorts of birds, where he found that if a bird does not learn its song, and it's interesting because most birds, the dad teaches the song. If you don't learn the song, the bird does not function well in bird society. And there's only a very small sensitive periods of, hatching out of the nest to nesting to then coming into a place where they're just listening to the sounds and trying to memorize the sounds. They're in training the patterns of the sounds in the bird brain. And then from there, they go on to the development of the ability to build those motor pathways. Some birds do it in sequence, and some birds do it in parallel and have overlap to these. But if you don't learn the bird song, you don't learn the bird song. And it's hard to be a bird without the bird song. And they found other things from these studies too, that the quality of the bird song, the ability, the specific types of bird song, the complexity of bird song tend to translate to improve scores on bird problem solving tests. And there are such a thing, like moving an object to find some food, things like that. Birds with higher bird song abilities tend to do better on bird IQ tests. So what's fascinating, though, is that from a bunch of other studies, starting even in the 80s with observational studies on language out of the University of Alaska, the daily lives of kids, there was coined this concept of the 30 million gap. And so they found that kids in high language environments and kids in low language environments, by the time they were in kindergarten or about 4 years old, kid A versus kid B, there was a 30 million word gap in the amount of words they'd heard or been exposed to by that time. And so you think about what happens to the brain and it just snowballs, right? And so when you look at different studies that have been done from Harvard and Stanford, and then the neuroimaging studies which have come in, we're pretty certain now that there's a sensitive period in language from around 6 months to 9 months where the brain is more attuned or interested in trying to understand the sensory patterns of language and laying down more synaptic connections in the brain. Now, that's the big joke. You can't do anything about it because just like birds, and we actually have some similar genetic pathways they've found. It's fascinating research, is you get into this area where later we do the motor pathways. So by the time our brain changes and grows and the right hemisphere and left hemisphere catch up with each other in their size and volume, you end up having those first words around 15 to 18 months. And that's when we can actually start organizing the gross motor control of the big muscles and the fine motor control of the little muscles from the lungs to the neck to the very complicated dynamics of the tongue and the mouth to allow us to create a vocalization and then later speech. And so this is all an incredibly complex system that allows humans to grow with their language abilities. Then we look at the broader sensitive period of that, which is actually about birth to 5 to 7. We don't quite understand why it's 5 to 7 yet. There's gender effects and all sorts of things, but 5 to 7 is that first bulk of language where you will develop your native tongue. But there's a secondary window from about 5 or 7 to 12. And at that point, you still have the ability to learn the language of things. It's just not as good as it was from a spoken language perspective in those first 7 years. And then after that, it becomes a lot more challenging to learn language in general, right? Some people have a natural ability for this through the lifespan. Other people do not. And we don't know why, but I just think that that's a really fascinating thing, specifically jumping in on how research in animals, historical context for observational studies, all the way to modern neuroscience and the very inklings of understanding are taking us. And that's just one area. And so as a parent in those areas, as long as you're aware of speaking with your child, you can develop routines and rituals either for your own family learning or with your child. And Barbara Fries, she's one of the probably world-renowned researchers on family routines and rituals, how they provide safety, a sense of purpose, they convey family values, they convey how we as a family behave and act and what's important to us. And that's where you can start to develop these small little habits through knowing that there's these sensitive periods with kids. Now, some people can take that and go full bore, and some people can just do what they're capable of and are able to do in that area. But either way, that awareness, the goal is to create a behavior, and that behavior then helps start building that one person in that kid's life. Of course, we're hoping they're going to have a lot more than one, but at least one. So that's where that goes from how we get into the details of things. But so your question was, where is it now and where's it going? That's where it framed up to. So since 2000, 19, we ran right into kind of the world had its experience with the Corona when it no longer was a beer name. And we ended up kind of putting it on pause a little bit, putting Fantastic Dads, just letting it be the newsletter. Over that time, never advertised, never really talked about it too much. To date, I've had around 3,000 dads go through it all, just kind of word of mouth referrals. I don't even know how people find the website, to be quite honest. And a lot of encouragement to step it up. So currently I work with NASA in human spaceflight. I love that. It's an insanely amazing, beautiful problem-solving environment of which I've never seen, and I don't know anything on the world that exists like it. Putting humans into space is incredibly complex and incredibly has a lot of variables. And this is almost exactly like human development, and I love it. And so what I'm doing now is I've realized how to take Fantastic Dads from first year foundations to something else. And what I'm doing now is I'm turning it into a more of a product experience that I call playbooks. So playbooks for different phases. So if you're a dad to be, you're the dad to be playbook. And if you're the first year, it's the first year playbook, second year playbook, third year playbook. We have a youth sports playbook coming. There's an early education playbook that's also in development right now. But why we use playbooks is because playbooks are more of a guide, and guides to execute plays in sport, to execute plays in business. A guide is what allows you the flexibility in the moment to make a decision to call a play. And again, I'm also drawing this from, Fantastic Dads being born from sport while I was at Red Bull, and noticing that when we look at human performance and human development and human potential, it's way cooler than looking at like child development or parenting, which I think can come with all sorts of emotional tensions that are not as super useful. And so reframing that into this playbook concept, the idea is I still recommend that you do the playbooks through paced learning. It's online. It's in kind of like a learning management system. There's a community aspect to it. Call them dad huddles. So depending on the playbook that you're in, you'll be able to join into dad huddles of people who are also in that same playbook. So we can talk about what's good, what we want to do a little bit better at, any interesting topics for the week, and just get set up for the plays that are coming up. And I like to use within that this term. It's been all over. I love it though, but it's an acronym. It's called WIN. So I just say like, what's important now? And that's what the win is. We do that in my household a lot. Is I just ask my kids, hey, what's important right now? What's the one thing that we need to do right now? And then that generally focus. You don't get lost in the distractions, and you can kind of execute. But yeah, so that's a playbook. And then the playbook's long tail is lots and lots and lots of resources, and also access to probably a Discord or WhatsApp. I'm playing with the two right now, just so a group of dads can talk and get together. And then there's a secret kind of background group. I guess not so secret, but for dads that are really all in, that we have a small group in the background that's called the All In Dads. And these are the guys that just, they put in the time, the work, the effort. They're building great families and great people. And I think those people should be connected to each other. So yeah, community, kind of a knowledge source, and then the ability to take that knowledge source and apply it in your own context, which I think is the most important part about information, is how you take that information into actions that could be, and then you figure out what actions should be in your own life.
Wow. Super comprehensive. And one of the questions I alluded to previously is what's the futuristic view, right? Like so you talked a little bit about, fMRI and when I asked you about technology, it's interesting. You went down the rabbit hole of language and the impact of language. And so therefore it leads me to think, well, language is in and of itself its own technology. And really what we're talking about is like interpersonal dialogue. You talked about having those key people in your life. How does the world look different? And I won't hold you to the answer 10 years from now, but like, how does the world look different for dads 10, 20, 30 years from now with, everything we're seeing in terms of, devices and AI and, you know, like, because I think the very fabric of learning, well, maybe the fabric doesn't change, but it would seem, well, maybe it does. The medium of learning is changing. And, you know, I can't ignore how much more my daughter is interested in my cell phone than any other toy that she has. And so, you know, it's not, is it good, is it bad? It's like, how do we think about it, you know, objectively? You know, is there room in, you know, the fantastic, is there a fantastic dad's like how to navigate technology playbook? Have you thought about that at all?
Oh yeah. Well, I think it might be FD42. Don't hold me to that, but that one's coming in the email drip.
Okay.
And I paired that one actually with a problem solving technique called the 5 whys. And a lot of times you can get to a root cause a lot quicker by asking why. Like, well, why do I use my cell phone around my kid? Well, I have important business calls and I don't want to miss something. Okay, well, why don't I want to miss something? And you might go, well, my clients, I might not be able to make any money if my clients can't get a hold of me. You go, okay, well, why do your clients have problems they need to get a hold of you so bad for? Like, why can't clients stick to certain hours? What would happen if you did that? And then you back out that maybe the reason you have your cell phone is maybe just from a personal habit and you don't have a good reason. And so that allows you to say, well, you know, maybe let's try something different and let's just do no toys and no devices at the table ever. And just see how long that runs. And you might get somewhere, but you have to run the little experiment. And that experiment's not going to get run if you haven't asked a couple questions about it. Because you're not going to know what experiment to run. You know? But on the bigger technological question, and I'm not anti screens or phones or anything, but this goes back to again, like, let's set up the stage for answering the question, is when I was at Red Bull, I would get asked the same question all the time because I was the mechanical engineer. I was called the human performance technologist. And people would say, man, what's it going to be like when we're doing sports on the moon and Mars and all sorts of things? Like, how's that going to change our physiology? Are we going to grow a third arm and stuff? And I was like, man, I don't know. I don't think about that stuff because we have so many interesting things to think about now. And even now, and even in the next 10 years, technology is going to be a tool, and it's a tool that is best used thoughtfully. And you have to figure out what thoughtful means. And then you can go back from the first principles and build your tool into what it adds value or brings value to in the big picture and the little picture, the near term, the long term. And so with that, it's important to realize that, again, technology is a tool because at the center of it, it's all about people and humans and our relationships with each other and our creative pursuits and our capabilities and our weaknesses and all the things that make us who we are. And that does not really change and even possibly gets dampened with the over application of technology. And so this is our principle and philosophy at Red Bull, is that we only use technology if we can use it in a very meaningful way. And I have a quick example of that. We had Gwen Jorgensen who came in. She was training for triathlon in the Olympics in Rio. And she wanted help with descending, going down a mountain. It was a weak spot in her program. And we all sat down, and man, the immediate thing that everybody went to was, oh, well, let's put like a GPS and an accelerometer and all these different things and kit out her bike and just, we can figure out all these split times down a mountain and take the lab out into the field. And I just said, why? Well, she needs to learn how to descend. Why does she not descend well? And that led into a conversation with people much smarter than I on inhibitions and fears and lack of experience and all sorts of things. And so what started out was throw technology on an athlete turned into, let's put her on the back of a motorcycle of one of the best motorcycle racers and show her what speed really looks like. Because if she gets that experience, sensory experience, her bike's going to feel slow. Her bike's going to feel easy. And then let's add in some other things where we put her in a pack of people, some cyclocross guys, and jostle her around, bump her a bunch, throw her off balance. Now she learns to be on balance. Now she learns what it feels to slide. So you cross-train those skills you learn from other people. And in that, we used analog, human to human. We didn't need any technology. And she won gold that year.
Crazy.
And so what I think is important is just to understand what is happening. And that's where I love, like, I know people are very worried about AI and what AI is going to do for the future and for individuals and for families and for kids. And I think that we have a great opportunity to have, instead of artificial intelligence, I like the augmented intelligence AI analogy a lot better. And so I don't necessarily think that in 10 years from now, the state of fatherhood or parenting is going to be changed too drastically through technology, mainly because there are so many analog things that are broken currently, that the efficiencies that are given to you by technology, unless suddenly people have more time to spend with their kids and are less stressed about work, that's a future that I would like to see. And more of a tribe, right? The village that we know is important, but the village has become two people or even one person in many families these days. And I don't think you have to be really thoughtful with technology to fix the village. And if you can do that, there'll be a profound change. But if it doesn't fix the village, it's just creating efficiencies in areas that I don't think necessarily impact the human in the middle, which is the really special bit.
It's interesting to hear you speak to the analog approach.
And I'm not a Luddite, I promise.
What's that?
I said I'm not a Luddite, I promise.
Okay. So the analog approach, I'm not sure if this was in one of your episodes or if I read it somewhere else independently, but I guess it doesn't really matter. You can tell me is, I think there were studies, human development studies, parents who were like basically looking at their phone, which meant an emotionless expression in front of their children. So when their children were looking to them to elicit some kind of response, and then they get this chronic or prolonged experience to an emotionless face. Was that in Fantastic Dads?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So there you go. Look at, I love to see how the knowledge is just kind of creeping in by osmosis. And I will actually just say a bit of a nod to listeners. I've been kind of entranced in and out listening to you, because it actually takes me to my 15 or 20 minutes of Fantastic Dads. So this has been a different podcast for me where I'm like, oh yeah, I'm listening. I'm always very much engaged in the conversation, but this has been a just an incredible window into your mind and the inspiration and the origins of your story, and I'm just incredibly grateful to have you on the show. And so, Brandon, when I think about connecting people to what you're doing, that's really very much what the underlying purpose to what we're doing here at DNA Things is connecting awesome people in this kind of ecosystem play across different disciplines. So I know, of course, dads are listening, but I'm sure they're synergistic initiatives that are running. If people want to get in touch with you, Brandon, what's the best way for them to find you?
Yeah, I mean, I have a pretty open door policy, open book on LinkedIn. You can find me, Brandon Larson. Fantastic Dads is a good place to find me once you sign up for anything there. And I try to make everything as humanly possible to be as accessible as possible. In the end, there's a small cost associated with, what we call the premium programs, the playbooks themselves. But outside of that, every playbook has a free trial. Every playbook has some free e-learning news drips or email drips. And any of those, if you reply to any one of them, it goes right to me. Also, our website, Fantastic Dads, you go into the contact information, you can get me there. So lots of ways. I really do think that we cannot build a comprehensive understanding of human development, a consilience of the sciences without the whole team. You know, when kids have a book about this hippo that falls down a well, and the punchline of the whole book is, it'll take an awful lot of us to lift this hippopotamus. And I just think that is beautiful when you're trying to build something bigger than yourself and bigger than others, and make that impactful for as many people as possible. So I really also encourage open discourse, open discussion. I'm not going to have everything right, but I put the rigor into it, and the more the merrier, and eyes on it, feedback, doing it for you and your family and the other families to come.
Love it. Love it. Well, yeah, you heard it from Brandon. It's like, let's lift that hippopotamus. Brandon, thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah. Thanks, Jeremy. I appreciate it. It's wonderful.
All right, that's a wrap. What an enlightening conversation. Brandon Larson, what an incredible individual. Today, we uncovered the profound impact of the first 3 years of a child's life and the pivotal role of intentional parenting, most notably here, the role of the father. Brandon's insights into human development, supported by his extensive background in sports science and engineering, provided invaluable perspectives, not just perspectives, but a practical playbook to implement. We learned about the importance of routines, the significance of a supportive community, and practical tips for enhancing fatherhood. Now, remember, as your journey as a parent is unique and is powerful, so let's honor that individual family experience. I know that I'm figuring it out as I go every day. Please share this episode with fellow parents and friends, and let's continue building a community that supports and uplifts each other. So thank you so much. Another episode of the DNA of Things. I'm looking forward to next time. More inspiring stories and more insights coming your way.